This past Friday marks 3 years since I have been assigned as your pastor, halfway through my first term. COVID certainly made it more difficult, and there are a few things I wish I had done differently, and some things that pain me. Attendance is down by about 30%. On most weekends, the collection is a little lower than I remember when I first got here. We lost the partnership with Head Start and had to sell the school property. But it's not all bad news. We fixed some windows and bricks in the church. Lots of little oversights and irregularities have been addressed. And despite having a lower overall income, streamlining has enabled us to gain some savings and get out of debt. Though 2 years later than I planned, and a little smaller than I envisioned, the aftercare program is launched and going well. The Come Lord Jesus program that we started my first summer is still going strong, and other small groups are still finding their way, but even the attempt is a good sign. We have a big retreat coming up. Our director of discipleship is helping us identify gifts and meet needs. Perhaps most importantly, in addition to many other things I haven't named, there are at least some people who say they're getting closer to God, growing in their faith. And this is what matters. Our first reading and the psalm set up the contrast of the two ways that lead either to blessing or to curse. And they boil down to two opposite choices: to place your hope in God or to place it in human beings, to follow the counsel of the wicked or to follow the law of the Lord. Obedience to God's law leads to wealth and protection and flourishing and blessing and joy. Wickedness leads to suffering, poverty, and exile from the promised land, according to the Old Testament. And this is part of the reason that Jesus' teaching today is so shocking. Like the other readings, he sets up two contrasts, blessing and woe. But he flips around what they look like. Blessing is now seen in poverty and hunger and sorrow and rejection and exile. Woe is found in wealth, satisfaction, laughter, acceptance. Why the reversal? And which is true? As with many things in this world, and especially in God's revelation, there's a lot of mixture and paradox. Part of the reason God spent thousands of years with the old covenants was to make a point at a historical level that human beings aren't capable of actually being good by their own efforts. With few short-lived exceptions, Israel, God's chosen people, was constantly embattled, broken, and afflicted as a direct result of their sinfulness and infidelity. And they end up exiled, just as God warned. Another reason for the Old Covenants was to make clear what the world is like. God spoke of exile as a punishment for sins, but we see that the reality is human beings are already in exile because of sin. The brutal truth is that the simple formula of do good and be rewarded has not worked correctly since Adam and Eve ate the fruit in the garden. The fundamental truth is still there. Goodness is rewarded. But the backwardness and broken of this world twists it and perverts it and obscures it. There's lots of little examples of being successful through being good, but far more severe examples of failing and being destroyed precisely because you were good. Honest leaders and fair businesses have been and often still are torn down and defeated by those willing to cheat, lie, steal, and kill. Just this past week, a cryptocurrency firm fired an executive, Brantley Milligan, because of a tweet supporting Catholic doctrine from years ago. This is why, when the time was right, Jesus stepped in to confirm these two realities: that human beings can't truly be good on their own, and that the real reward for goodness is not in this life. In fact, being good in this life will guarantee that you suffer in the world, because it is ruled by sin and the devil, who destroys what is good. This is what Jesus means by these paradoxes. He's not saying that laughter and food and money are intrinsically evil, only that they are unreliable as standards for our goodness. If we count them as evidence that we are doing well, we will be deceived and find ourselves on the wrong side of judgment. The flip side, of course, is that when we are suffering and lack these things, it does not prove that we've done something wrong. True goodness starts with admitting that we can't trust ourselves or the world to judge that. It starts with admitting our need for God's grace. And goodness grows by cooperating with grace and seeking above everything else to love God and neighbor. And goodness grows to maturity when it continues to love, even though that causes us to suffer. There is no other way in this world to prove that we are good except to be willing to suffer greatly for the sake of doing what is right. We might be doing the right thing when everything is easy and comfortable, but there's a good chance we aren't. To put it another way, Jesus' Beatitudes and woes are meant to make us ask this question: am I Catholic because I know God is real and I want to love him above all else? Or am I Catholic because I think it helps me maintain my own self-image as a good person? This is why penance is always part of our faith, why our heroes are, by worldly standards, failures, martyrs and confessors who threw away all kinds of good things and even their lives for the sake of staying faithful to God in ways that seem, to worldly eyes, to be minor or technical. In the book of Revelation, God says he will spew out the lukewarm. So our goal cannot be to maximize the number of lukewarm people in the church, who in the end won't make it anyway. It is rather to prioritize drawing as many people as possible from lukewarmness into the heat of radical holiness and love. And this often means choosing worldly failure for the sake of spiritual success. So whatever the numbers, the bank account, the property we have, they cannot be the measure of our success. And in some ways, poverty and hunger and rejection can make us as individuals and this parish more effective in its true mission, because it forces us to dig deeper in our love for God and neighbor. My prayer, my promise as your pastor, is that I will continue to try to serve that mission, love of God and neighbor. And so I ask you, will you share in this mission? Continue to share and endure poverty and hunger and sorrow, hatred, exclusion, insults, detraction, for the sake of our call to love, not as the world does, but as God does. If you will, then I cannot promise you success in this world. I can't even promise you that this parish will survive, though I think it just might. But I can promise you that if you are faithful, despite your trials, you will know joy and peace in this life that none of those things can give you. Even better, I can promise that your reward will be great in heaven. Trust not in me, a man who can fail, but in God who never will.